Welcome everybody to this QEC mini-series, UFOs and UAPs, Are They Real? We are going to start off with the Roswell incident of 1947. It is one of my favourites, but also is one of the most popular in the ufology world. There is so much information about this case, so let's get straight into it. At the beginning of 1947, there was a huge increase in the reported number of UFO sightings, with over 300 reported cases across the United States of America alone, and even more across the globe. One of the most famous was the crash of a disc or saucer that occurred sometime before June the 14th in 1947 on the Foster Ranch, Roswell, New Mexico. Eyewitnesses say that there was something that crashed and was reported to the authorities. On July the 4th, a rancher named Mac Brazel visited the crash site to collect the debris. Then on July the 7th, he takes some of the pieces to local sheriff George Wilcox, who then contacts Colonel Butch Blanchard at the Roswell Army Base, US Air Force. If you didn't know this already, the Roswell Army Base was where the 509th Bomber Group deployed the atomic bombs at the end of World War II. Colonel Blanchard alerts his superior, General Roger Ramey. Following this discussion, he orders Major Jesse Marcel, the 509th Intelligence Officer, to go and assess and recover anything from the crash site. Following this, Major Jesse Marcel briefs Colonel Butch Blanchard on his visit to the crash site and reports on his findings. On the morning of July the 8th, Colonel Butch Blanchard orders Public Information Officer Lieutenant Walter Holt to give an official press release quoting that they believe they have retrieved a, quote, flying saucer from the crash site. Not long after, the Roswell Daily Records ran the headline, RAAF captures flying saucer on a ranch in the Roswell region, but they don't reveal any details on the, quote, flying disc. Strangely, on the same day, the Air Force changes their story. Next, General Roger Ramey orders for the retrieved wreckage to be taken to him in Fort Worth, Texas, for his own inspection. They then decide to now say it was pieces of a weather balloon. Interesting. Then they issue a press release where you can see from the photos the so-called wreckage in Ramey's office with Marcel and the pieces he had supposedly misidentified. Seems like it's the start of some sort of cover-up, and Marcel is basically the scapegoat. On July the 9th, the Roswell Daily Record changed its tone and released a headline that the harassed rancher who located the saucer was sorry he told about it. Following this, Mac Brazel, the rancher, reveals that what he found was just rubber, tinfoil, paper and sticks. So now, conveniently, with this eyewitness testimony along with General Roger Ramey's weather balloon theory, the world is to forget about the Roswell incident as it was obviously solved. Or was it? Moving forward to 1978. Stanton Friedman, a nuclear physicist and a UFO researcher, interviewed Jesse Marcel, now retired from the US Air Force, who was the one to assess the crash site back in 1947. He still believed that the wreckage was not a weather balloon, and that the original story of a crashed flying disc was the true account of what he found that day. He then gave the following statement, quote, "It felt like you had nothing in your hands. It wasn't any thicker than the foil out of a packet of cigarettes. But the thing about it that got me is that you couldn't even bend it. You couldn't dent it. Even a sledgehammer would bounce off of it. I knew I had never seen anything like that before." He continues to add, quote, "It wasn't anything from this earth, that I'm quite sure of. Being an intelligence officer, I was familiar with just about all material used in aircraft and or air travel. It was nothing like that. It could not have been." Following this, Stanton interviewed more key witnesses, civilian and military, and concluded that he felt that there had been a massive cover-up that happened in 1947, and the public was lied to about the truth of the Roswell incident, calling it a, quote, "cosmic Watergate." So, this cover-up suppressed information about the following: the crash site, the material, the spacecraft, and alien bodies that were found at the scene in 1947. So now, in the present day, there are two main theories about what really happened. Theory 1 is that it was indeed a weather balloon, but not the weather balloon debris that was pictured in the press release on July the 8th, 1947. In 1994, the US Air Force released a report admitting that there was indeed a cover-up that took place, but not a cover-up of a flying disc, but a top-secret project called Project Mogul, being conducted by Dr. Maurice Ewing of Columbia University. They were developing in secret an airborne monitoring station that could easily spy on the Soviet Union or other international threats of nuclear development using sound waves with different sound monitoring devices attached to high altitude balloons. They were tested at multiple locations around the US, and one of these test sites was indeed Roswell, New Mexico in the summer of 1947. But this seems all too convenient that they had to use this cover-up to cover up a cover-up. So going back to Jesse Marcel, as quoted by him to Stanton in 1978, he was a well-respected intelligence officer for the US Air Force, and it is fair to assume with his experience and knowledge, he would have easily identified a weather balloon and not misinterpreted it for a flying disc and vice versa. And the fact that his explanation differs from the retracted public press release stinks of a cover-up gone wrong. Remember guys, let me know what you think in the comments below. In 1995, the General Accounting Office for the US Congress initiated an audit at the request of New Mexico Congressman Steve Schiff, a UFO skeptic. He wanted to locate all government records relating to the Roswell incident to determine if these records were handled properly. The report was published by the US Air Force in 1995, report titled The Roswell Report Fact vs. Fiction in the New Mexico Desert, determined that the debris was related to the then secret project, Project Mogul, back in 1947, and what Marcel had seen and what was reported in the first press release was an overreaction. and that the term flying saucer was new and didn't have a clear meaning attached to it. So therefore a balloon would be classed as a flying disc. Strange. There is another hole in this report that they obviously didn't consider addressing. Now, remember that it was claimed that bodies were found at the crash site. In 1997, the US Air Force released another report titled "The Roswell Report Case Closed," giving the explanation of the bodies recovered from the crash site were test dummies used in the mid-1950s. They were testing the effects of parachute jumping on human bodies by dropping human-like dummies over New Mexico. But there is a couple of issues with this theory. First of all, these test dummies were 6 foot tall and human-like to represent a human. But what was reported to have been recovered were small, quote, childlike size bodies that were claimed to have been found at the crash site. Also, the dates don't add up, as the crash at Roswell was in 1947 and they did not start doing these tests until the 1950s. When Colonel John Haynes was asked about the obvious problems with the official dating, he basically said that the eyewitnesses, including the US Air Force, remembered the events incorrectly, saying, quote, "Details tend to become compressed." So suggesting that a truly life-changing event for the people involved, including recovering unknown material and childlike bodies that were seemingly not from this earth, were just simply mistaken for parachute test dummies. Another interesting thing from the report is the fact that when requesting information from the Roswell Air Force Base from the year of 1947, it was found that all records from that time, January to October 1947, had been destroyed, and the persons or organisation that had destroyed these files and the authority under which they had done so were not indicated. The alternate theory of the Roswell incident is that the government engaged in a cover-up to hide knowledge of extraterrestrial visitations to Earth in the late 1940s. There were more than 600 eyewitness testimonies that included high-level military personnel. Suspicious details between the official records released and the accounts of Jesse Marcel described clearly that the debris from the crash site was otherworldly. Reports from the KGFL claimed that they had recordings of these admissions but were told by the FCC and the US Senator at the time, Dennis Chavez, not to air them. Shortly after Brazel's statement on July the 9th, playing down the crash to be a weather balloon, he left his job as a rancher to start a new business in Alamogordo. He was then seen in a brand new truck that he had purchased, causing some people to believe that he was paid to keep quiet and took the offer and left. There are also reports of the military threatening locals to keep quiet about the incident, also coming into their homes to search for remains of the crash that had been recovered. The military had been given authorization at this time to use physical force and weaponry if necessary. Another interesting factor is that Colonel Blanchard, after giving the go-ahead for the first official press release, stated there was indeed a crash disc. He strangely went on leave after he issued the controversial press release. And there are sources from the military that say he was told to go out and basically cover up the mess at the crash site and to make sure no one would believe that it was anything other than a crashed weather balloon. To support this, there was a sealed document that was written by Lieutenant Walter Holt, a public information officer, claiming that the photo taken in Ramey's office with Marcel was indeed a hoax, and that the actual materials recovered were in fact replaced with weather balloon material for the press release photos to cover up the real story. Marcel was insulted by this but had little he could do about it. Also, to add to this, Ben Games was a pilot to then Major General Lawrence C. Craigie, the Chief of Engineering at Wright Field Air Force Base, where it is commonly thought that the real wreckage and bodies were transported and housed. He claimed that he flew Major General Craigie to Roswell to examine the wreckage, and after a few hours, he then flew him directly to Washington, D.C. to meet with then President Truman. A few months later, Major General Craigie assumed the new position of Chief Director of R&D and founded Project Sign, the first official investigation of the UFOs by the US Air Force, causing many to believe that he was in possession of extraterrestrial materials and knowledge. The eyewitness reports at the time are all consistent with their accounts of the bodies that they had seen, stating they were small, consistently describing them to be 3.5 to 4 foot tall, with large heads and large eyes. Many military officials have claimed to hear secondary information about the recovered bodies, and some stated that they had even seen the bodies, to name a few: Lieutenant Walter Holt, the public information officer from the Roswell base; Sergeant William C. Ennis, a flight engineer at the Roswell base, who was stationed in one of the primary receiving hangars for the debris called Hangar P3. He denied for many years the story, claiming it was a crashed weather balloon. However, in 2008 he changed his story. He said, quote, "It was a spaceship. After all these years, I still don't know how that ship flew. There was no engine. Before I go, I'd like to know." There was also many eyewitnesses that claimed they also saw the metal that Jesse described and referred to as, quote, "memory metal," due to its alien-like properties for the time, describing it as weightless, thin, smooth, and could not be scratched, burned, or cut. Many military personnel also contribute to the description of this mysterious memory metal. Retired Brigadier General Arthur E. Exon also had a lot of interesting information regarding the Roswell incident and backed up the claims of this strange unknown material, whilst working as a lieutenant colonel. Along with working on the technology at Wright Field's Foreign Technology Division, whose purpose was to reverse engineer foreign tech. Along with his claims, there was also a memo that surfaced in the 1980s detailing a conversation on September 15, 1950, between physicist Robert I. Sarbacher and other government scientists. Sarbacher says after working on the material most likely recovered from the Roswell crash in 1947, quote, "All we know is we didn't make them, and it's pretty certain they didn't originate on the Earth." So, to round up this theory of a government cover-up, there is a lot of conflicting information that contradicts itself, and the official reports of what happened at Roswell in 1947. They claimed that the debris was from a secret high-altitude weather balloon, but had Jesse Marcel posed with items that are not from a secret high-altitude weather balloon. They were just simply sticks, rubber, paper, and tinfoil. This suggests that they in fact did want this to be a cover-up. Whether they were covering up a flying disc, saucer, or a secret weather balloon doesn't make a difference. It was indeed a cover-up by the US government, that is a fact. Also, the official reports claim that the bodies described by hundreds of eyewitness accounts and testimonies of being childlike, 3.5 feet to 4 feet tall, were not the parachute test dummies that weren't even used until years after the Roswell crash, and that the witnesses were remembering everything incorrectly, including high-level military personnel. And then you have Marcel himself stating, quote, "All I could do is keep my mouth shut, and General Ramey was the one who told the newsmen what it was and to forget about it. It was nothing more than a weather balloon. Of course, we both knew differently." So this is exactly why the Roswell incident from back in 1947 was the first of this QEC mini-series on UFOs. It is one of the most famous and well-known cases in ufology, and there is incredible evidence and eyewitness reports to strongly suggest that this was in fact a huge government cover-up of a crash and recovered flying disc or saucer from back in 1947. And since then, there have been huge efforts to continue to muddy the waters and give so much disinformation to completely confuse and taint the real information and facts from this event. And unfortunately, most of the key eyewitnesses are now no longer with us to get any up-to-date information. So please everybody, don't forget to let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe and share this video if you enjoy it. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thank you very much. QEC. Part 2 will be coming soon. The next one is an incredible story from Westall School, Melbourne, Australia in 1996. Thanks.